Excuse my voice today because I'm just a bit congested with allergies. Um, you know the things that you say all the time to
Mhm.
like I was just thinking that that'd be a really fun like little episode of like just like
Mm.
okay, here are the things that we say all the time to kind of everyone, and they feel like truisms,
Yes,
and I think they're mostly quite funny. I think some of the things.
true. I'll have to just think
Uh,
of them, but probably if you start, then it'll
oh,
prompt you.
it'll just roll. So the thing that I say all the time, and I okay, full disclosure, I cannot tell you at this point if these are things I've heard from other people, and I've just used them so many times that I've forgotten where I've heard them. So if they belong to anyone else, I'm sorry, like full
Full
credit.
respect.
Yeah, like nothing's new. Like even that, like that's the thing that I talk about all the time. Like even if I come up with an idea, I promise it's not original. Like women
Yes.
have been birthing for millennia. Like I'm not so arrogant to think that I'm the first person to look at it from a slightly different angle. Like it's a pretty So
Yeah.
but one of the things that I say a lot is certainly when women get to sort of 40, 41 weeks of pregnancy, there's that urgency to like get it out already. Like when's this going to be over? And it's a really weird little space to be in. And I'm forever telling women, we haven't left one woman pregnant. There is not someone walking around who's like 7 years pregnant. It will end, you know?
That woman down the street, she's 10 years postpartum, still got a baby in there.
Yeah. It's just, the silliness of it. But it's like, yeah, it is, there is a finite amount of time. And towards that part of our pregnancy, it honestly feels like you've been pregnant for 10 years. Like and I know for myself when I was pregnant with all my kids, but certainly the first one, there was this like loop in my head of like, is this really going to happen? Am I really like,
Yes.
will I be pregnant forever? Yeah. No, you won't.
You won't. I've had that feeling too with my first one when I was 42 weeks and 2 days later, I was like, maybe I hacked the system and I'm the one elephant that is pregnant forever.
Yeah. But she's out, right? She's
And
out.
so here we have it.
Yeah.
Didn't hack anything.
Yeah.
But what comes to mind?
Yep.
It's less fun than yours, but mine is that when you are in those like from 36 weeks till like actually into the early postpartum, that I sort of call that the liminal space. Like there is this really, I think it comes to mind because I spoke to a woman about it yesterday, that there where you're extra sensitive to all things, actually, quite honestly, and probably quite intuitive. And I think often that time can be seen as like, oh, I'm just like big and fluidy and like uncomfortable and like can't eat, but I'm hungry and reflux, or, all these. And it's seen as sort of like very symptomatic time, and counting the days and getting a lot of text messages about, are you still pregnant? Is that safe to be still pregnant? That classic, repeated loop that they can be in. But I try and remind women and their partners that they're in this very precious liminal space. And I say this every time, like really honor it as a very spiritual time in some ways, where you can probably have enhanced intuition and your senses are very fine-tuned, and maybe relish in that and see what comes from that.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And I'm sorry, excuse me. This is allergies. It is what it is.
It's okay. You're not contagious through the stream.
No.
No one's going to be worried.
Also, I love that it's now at the point where we've been doing this enough that I'm like, all right, this is who I am. We're rocking up and just getting it done.
You're comfortable now. That's great.
But there's a shared client of ours, actually, who I don't think will mind if we share this information, who has discussed with me, at least, I'm sure you as well, just that it's a weird feeling in pregnancy as the pregnancy goes on, to feel a little bit less interested in the things that used to really interest you. And I would say it's really common. I'll meet people in the beginning part of the pregnancy, their ideas and ideals about what the end of the pregnancy is going to look like. And I listen, and I do not judge, and I listen. And then inevitably it gets to a point sort of 32, 34 weeks, and they're like, oh, I actually don't want to do all the things that I thought I wanted to do. And actually, now that you mention it, I don't think I want to work to 40 weeks. I think I'd like to finish a bit earlier. And there is this, exactly what you're talking about, this like going into the liminal space that is, it's a gradual process and can be a little confronting because it's like, I'm not unhappy, I'm not depressed, but I don't want to do those outward things as much. Because you're doing so much internal work. Maybe you're conscious of it, maybe you're not. But actually go with it, because that is the best space to be mentally going into birth. Like, the more you can drop into that, like, instinctive part of you, the easier the whole process is going to be. Like, that's a really big work to stop thinking, right? So if
Yeah.
if your body's letting you do it, like, there's nothing wrong with you. That's perfect. Keep going.
Mm.
But culturally, we're told that's weird,
Yeah.
which it's not.
And a negative
Working through
thing.
your pregnancy is weird, actually, if you think about what your body's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
wrong on so many accounts.
yeah.
On that exact thing, I actually try and tell the partners, like I bring it, because you can see it in those prenatal visits. You can see that her brain changes, and then like as the months and months and months progresses, you can sort of see just like, oh, like her whole embodiment, it's slower and more grounded typically. But then there might be this worry, like, I can't remember anything, or like I lost the thing, or my keys, or all the things. And then I go to the partner, I'm like, this is it, foster this, because if it's accepted around her and she's not seen as now she's stupid and has pregnancy brain and all those terminologies that is degrading, if we can kind of go, yay, we're winning, her neocortex is shutting down, woohoo, then she will feel really, good about it, hopefully. So exactly on that, I'm like, tell her partner, hey, this is what we need more of. Can you step up?
Yeah. And actually, it leads me to another thing that I always say. So I
Right.
knew we'd do it because it's so, this is just the experience, right? Like, I always talk to women about pregnancy brain. Well, I try, not always, but, a lot of the time. Because there is this idea out there that as you're pregnant, your memory is a bit shoddy. Yeah. Because we do lose our keys. I mean, oh God, I lost my keys, and then I lost my second set of keys, and then I had to get the car towed, and I had to get the keys remade, and it was like thousands of dollars. It was really special. But actually, women's memory recall when studied is actually better in pregnancy. It's that what women are thinking about is significantly more important than where they left the keys. They're actually creating a world for their baby to exist. So they're really, really mentally making a huge space for their entire family to change, and for this baby to be, who am I? How am I going to do it? What are the days going to be like? What do I have to learn? What do I have to eat? Like, there are so many thoughts constantly going around. So they're using those faculties for something that's much bigger than where the keys were left.
So true. And she's sensing, what is the environment like? What's my connection to my partner, my immediate family? Is the neighbor upset with me? Gosh, so many times I've had women like, oh, my neighbor's really like, we're having this thing with the neighbor, and it really affects her more than normal. She's like, why am I so, worried about that? I'm like, well, it really matters to you how your immediate environment is it safe to start labor? Yeah, that's such a big one. Yeah, it needs to be normalized. So good on us for talking about it.
Yeah. And then the other thing that happens as well, leading on from that, is if there's any, again, the things that we say, if there's any tension, and it doesn't matter if you've been together for, the beginning of the pregnancy or for 20 years, if there's anything that is just not being said or not being addressed, and it may be where you are at the moment, at the beginning of pregnancy, you both have capacity to live like that. It kind of irritates you, but you move on and you get distracted or whatever. Could be your mother-in-law, could be your partner, could be really simple things, could be big things. But it's almost guaranteed to blow up when your baby's about 4 weeks old. So I would, 10 out of 10, if anyone is pregnant, I think book 3 couples counseling, if you've got a partner, 3 couples counseling sessions, like beginning of pregnancy, middle of pregnancy, end of pregnancy, and maybe one for like when you're 4 weeks postpartum. Hopefully bring up some of these things, have a forum to discuss. It's so hard to find the help when you need the help. Actually, like one of the big things that's happened when you're feeling low and you're feeling stuck in that whatever it is you don't have the thinking capacity to be like, okay, I need help. Now I need to find someone. I need to get a referral, possibly.
Not
Like
going to
there's
happen.
a lot of like, no, there's just too many steps and too much like, what is it, mental load for you to
Mm,
actually get the help you need. Whereas if you've got this appointment, best case scenario, you turn up at 4 weeks postpartum, you're like, we're amazing, everything's perfect, we're the best and the strongest. And then what's probably more likely is there's one or two things that are driving you a little bit nuts, and let's get on top of it really quickly, and
mm,
so it doesn't fester. Because there's some shitty statistics, like I think when your first child is 3 years old is like the most common time for people to separate and divorce.
mm.
Um, or after your second child is 1 year old, which is interesting because maybe you've gone back again and then you've done the whole thing again, and then it's a year after and you're like, finally have a bit of freedom and you're not as physically tethered to each other. And there's been just resentment that's built up over a few years, which is a lot of the time manageable, actually, and a lot of communication things. I mean, you and I are sitting in those spaces all the time, right? Where you see just like a disconnect in how people are talking to each other. And it's
Mm,
certainly not our
mm.
job to be counselors of any kind, but we can notice things and be like, I feel like he's saying this and you're saying this. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, we're talking about something different. And it can be really, really simple.
Yeah.
Um, but it can also turn a bit ick, and it'll just make things easier. Even if it's not the make or break, it can just be the difference between having a bit of a stressful time and a really joyous time, which
Yeah.
it's actually meant to be.
It's
Mm.
actually the whole purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, building on that, is I say that, we start out as a romantic couple, right? We meet each other in life and we're like, oh, I love you, you love me, whoop to do, it's a great dance. And we have all these privileges when we don't have a child to care for. And then we make babies and the energy changes. And so in that lead up to coming into that month of giving birth, I sort of start talking, well, a little bit earlier, but I start talking about, like, so we are these two individual entities that have created a union, and now you're going to the next level, which is parenthood, and you're now going to juggle that. So it's almost like you're starting a business together. I know it's a really terrible analogy, but people really get it often, that, oh, okay, well, in a business we do have to have meetings together, and we do have to actually have contingency plans, or like we need to have systems in place for the business to run. And it's like not that different when you are running a family, right? And so I sort of start talking about it from that perspective, which then creates more of a creative way to go, okay, well, how are we going to manage the household chores, or like all the different aspects that are in people's lives? But also then I say it is your responsibility individually to kind of really take stock and go, what are the things that I need for me to feel like a whole happy human? And instead of it being all of it like we're doing it all together, or it's this fault or that fault, but we do need to actually show up and go, I have these 3 things in the postpartum that will make me feel sane. Most can relate to running a business or working in a business. They know that there are systems in place that needs to be attended to so that the whole thing runs smoothly. And it's the same in the relationship. And it's a way of actually taking the relationship seriously, and honor that there are different components that are really essential for it to work. We can't just assume that we read each other's minds and that you will just pick up the slack when I'm not. Like, it has to be communicated. And that's the one thing I find that can, to your point earlier, can be that like linkage to kind of like, can we set in place, apart from seeing maybe a therapist or a counselor, can we also have some premeditated maybe sentences or ways to communicate, or agreements of like, hey, when I'm maxed out, here's how we're going to handle this? Because we're not going to do the things in the same lineage way. There's going to be days where one is really maxed out and then the other has a little bit more to give. Brene Brown has a beautiful talk on this, actually. But so I often say, I ask them, it's like a homework thing where I'm like, so I need you to think about in the next few weeks, what are the things that for each individual person in this family, what is it that you need? What are the 3 things that you need in the first 3 months on a day-to-day basis to feel normal and well and sane?
Mm,
because we would be silly to pretend that you don't need anything, right? And they're
mm,
going to be different needs. And if we've talked about them prior, then we won't judge. And
mm,
hopefully we won't feel guilty for needing them either. Often for partners, for men, it's like, oh, I really like a need for social interaction, or it might be to go to the gym, but that feels indulgent when no one has slept for 3 days and his partner is stuck with a baby to the boob and she can't even have a shower without like fighting for it.
mm,
So it's about this, like, how do we reduce the feeling of like, is this like, am I overindulgent in doing this one thing that actually is going to mean that I can give more when I come home?
mm,
So I have a whole worksheet for them on that. But really bringing it into that individual, take responsibility for what it is that you need in a limited amount in the postpartum, but like, let's just hone what are those things for each of you so that it's pre-planned and you know that this is the leeway we need to give one another so that we can be the best that we can be in an otherwise very typically challenging time.
mm,
Only challenging from the perspective that things are changing so dramatically, right?
mm,
It's just like, oh, right, we're fine. You hit the ground running and you have to learn to breastfeed right away, etc., without sleep, etc.
mm,
So I think it's just, yeah, compensating for that.
mm. And it's good because you are both, I think, at capacity quite often in the first few months. Like it's not maybe like later times, through your family growing where there are kind of dips and bends for each person. I find often in the first 3 months, there are times where everyone's kind of at max capacity. And so also having that, we've talked about it before, but also having those external, who are the external people there to help you? And this is, again, something I say quite often, and it sounds really, I don't know, it doesn't sound great the way that it's phrased, but it is what it is. Like, there are usually, hopefully, like handfuls of people around you. Some of them may not be the best support emotionally, some of them may not be the best physical support, but like it's a really like analytical way to look at your friendship. It's kind of shitty, but to be like, look, this person crappy for the emotional support, but will make food or will do dishes, and like really size up what your people can do and know to call on the right person for the right thing, right? Because sometimes that's what happens. Like, oh, mum's around, and you know what, mum might not be great with the feelings sometimes, or she may may not really, it might be a lot of tension there, but she's happy to come and like clean the dishes and do the laundry and whatever. And so you just say to her, this is what I need help with. Be really direct with the people around you. And nothing's perfect, but it can at least help you as a family, as a new burgeoning family, to figure out where the gaps are in what you need. And actually, maybe there are more strengths around you than you realize. Because often people are like, oh, I don't want that person near me, I don't want that person near me, that one's going to drive me crazy, this one can't do anything, my sister's like that. But maybe they want to help, and then you're worried about them being too involved. So like, yeah, just have a bit more of an analytical kind of think about, well, what can they do? And then if there are people who want to help you, give them opportunities to help in the way that you want to receive help, which will be
Yeah,
in little,
great.
yeah, but
Being really clear.
yeah,
Yeah.
don't just invite people over.
No,
Like, there are
no.
jobs. Yeah.
Tasks, needs, meet my needs.
And I think a lot of people actually want to help as well. Like
Yeah.
and some people really just don't know, they don't want to overstep, so they'll do nothing. Yeah. So just being really clear, like, hey, I need this today, or that. What about labor and birth things? Are there things you say during labor, or, tricky bits?
I am sure.
Yeah, I can go. I've got one.
Yeah, go. Oh, great,
And
go.
and we'll do the thing.
Yeah.
So one thing I say a lot. So a lot of women who come to me for care, they don't want to have drugs. They don't want to have medicines to stop them feeling labor. So, but there is usually a sense of uncertainty around that because you haven't done it before. So like, and it gets a bit of a bad rap out there. So there can be a lot of confidence in our body, and a lot of excitement, but also like, what if it gets really tricky? So first, just normalizing that you haven't done it before. So that's okay to be uncertain. Like, already just like, to have unmedicated physiological birth, you don't have to be super confident. Like, you don't have to be like, oh, I've got this, because that's actually not part of the deal. You have to be willing to meet it, like ready to meet the challenge and be be prepared and not wanting to run away from birth, because because you can if you want to, but if you would like to experience birth, you need to be ready for it. And the other thing I talk a lot about is endorphins, and none of the technical terms, but let's just say for any stressful experience, you have endorphins that are created to make you feel good. If someone is a runner or they've done any kind of, intensive workouts and things where they get into that zone where they feel good, that's birth. So like in a perfect kind of scenario, you'll be doing some things. After a while, your body's going to kick in and help you. So the goal isn't to take the pain away ever, actually, but it's to work with your body to help encourage your body to work in its optimal way. And actually the body is really, really, really clever at making you feel great about giving birth. And the number of women that I work with who within a few days of having a baby are like, I can't wait to do that again. Sometimes it wears off. Sometimes after like 6 months, they're like, actually, I think I'm done. But there is this intense like euphoria that should actually be surrounding you during labor. The other thing kind of that works in with this whole cocktail of idea is that you will experience, I would expect, not everyone, but I would expect most women will experience multiple plateaus where they feel like they can't do it. And, it's called, I think, crisis of confidence by some people, and it's called many different things. We used to call it transition, just that end part of labor. And then there was a bit of a bigger conversation about these multiple transitions through labor. And so I talk to women about when you feel like you're losing your shit, whenever that is in labor, if it ever gets to the point where you're like, I actually can't do this is really hard, and this is mad. I will say what we talk about in pregnancy is we're going to give it 40 minutes. So whatever you're doing, if it's not working, we'll need to try to find something new. And then we're going to give it 40 minutes so that, because what has likely happened is your body has been kind of laboring, and then it's increased in intensity. And suddenly what was working is no longer working because the intensity is increased. So the hormones that make you feel good are lagging a little bit behind. It takes them about 40 minutes or so to kind of meet your new level. So expect to feel the overwhelm, know it's normal, and give your body time to meet you where your new capacity is. Yeah, that's something I say a lot.
It's so funny because we've never talked about this.
No.
And hearing you, I'm like, oh my God, she says the things I say. That's so great. I feel really validated now that I'm listening. Really I'm not making it up.
Me too.
That's so funny. And even some of the words are the same, so it's definitely not original. But anyways,
we've stolen it from someone. Sorry.
We did. So the way that I've talked about some of these things is that there is I call it a mini transition. Mm-hmm. So I'm still using those words. So I need to upgrade probably. But I sort of say that there is this, I speak a lot about pre-labor, which is, I might just share now, is that I think pre-labor is not talked about enough. I don't think it's celebrated enough. To me, pre-labor is like, that's the bit that really tells us a lot of information about how the rest will unfold. Because if pre-labor is this like stressful, frictionful, like why and then they're all in the head, that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the unfolding of the labor. Not, of course, it's not set in stone, but I spend a lot of time talking about how we can make pre-labor a really beautiful time to connect, so that we're setting up those hormones that you talk about, a runner, etc., so that we can really set the tone and the vibe for those hormones to do this beautiful dance that it does to put us into ultimately a bit of a trance, which is what hypnotizes us to continue throughout labor. And in that unfolding, that the first thing that you then, if you find your group, I always talk about like, watch comedies or get really romantic or like just do really nice things that feel loving. And then my mantra for that time is to do life, meaning don't think you're about to have a baby, but just go and have a tea with your best friend or do little things that you can still do, because this isn't the full-blown labor yet, but you're in that space where we want to foster all the oxytocin and relaxation and joy. And then what will happen is that unfolds typically over a few nights. And then you hit your first I call it the mini transition, where you're like, holy shit, this sucks.
Yeah.
And I can't do this. And that's often, as the doula, that's when I get called in very classically. So I kind of talk about it as there'll be this first meeting of the wall. And that's where I then make an analogy of a car, which is sad, where it's kind of like the hormones are revving up and it's trying to get into the next gear, which all the men get. So that's great. You know, they kind of understand what's happening. But I'm saying it as like the hormones are really upscaling now and it's getting to the next level. So we want to foster that, but it's going to feel unsettling. You were hopefully in this like pre-labor, I've got this, like I'm feeling the cramps. It's a little bit longer and stronger slowly, but you can still go and make yourself a cup of tea and maybe have a chat to a friend or whatever. But then that change is like, oh, I'm not sure about this. And so we prep for that. So, and then we can allow that beautiful dance of the hormones to put you into the trance that takes you through the active labor part. So that's my version of it.
And I think, yeah, and it all fits together perfectly. And then there's also, it's so hard, I think, when you're talking to, women about what labor can look like, right? Because we know that it's so many different ways. And I'll try to tell people, whatever I tell you it might be, it will be something else. It will, whatever your dream, it'll be something different. Doesn't mean it's going to be negative. It just is so unscripted, right? And it's so unique for you, for your baby. Your baby's actively involved in this. It's not just you. It's not just this mechanical function of a baby coming out. Like the baby's, controlling some of the hormones as well. They're actually responsible for how strong, regular, frequent the contractions are. So, if it's not happening as quickly as you want, be like, okay, maybe my baby needs a little bit more time. And there is that. So pre-labor, I agree. It's really probably one of the few times in labor that we can be really mentally savvy about how we manage it. Whereas once labor really hits, when we talk about established labor, I think we both mean regular, consistent contractions that don't stop no matter what you do. Right? And again, the way I would describe it to people, because women are often like, when do I call you? And that's the other big question. When do you call me? And well, as a private midwife, I'm really fortunate. And I say, when you need me. So if you're worried, or if you need help, that's when you call me. So it's pretty simple. If you're not worried and you don't need help, please call me in the morning. But if you're worried and you need help overnight, even if it's not labor, that's when you call me. But most of the time, women don't worry overnight, and most of the time, women don't need me unless they're in labor. But certainly, the kind of the pre-labor, early part of labor, it can look so different for so many people. It can just come out of nowhere and all of a sudden you're in active labor, which is quite shocking, actually. And that can feel a lot like you're holding on and you're just a real passenger in this experience. And that can be really intense in itself. Most midwives and doulas I know don't want a quick labor. We want at least 5-6 hours. We don't want it to come out of nowhere. We want to like enjoy it a little bit and like be in the zone. You want to have a chance to use your TENS machine, a chance to fill up the water. Whereas when labor's less than 3 hours or 3 hours or less, it can feel so overwhelming that you kind of are just like constantly being taken to this next level, right? So that's a bit intense.
Because that synergy of that endorphin-rich groove isn't happening. It's just like,
yeah, you don't have the time. Your body just is kind of like, all right, here's what's happening. I mean, you do usually feel insanely overwhelmed when the baby comes out as well, and it can be a little bit of time before you come back to earth. And then there are these, in sort of the pre-labor, early labor, what I'm talking about is the situations where you might be contracting regularly, but you'll have like a couple of strong contractions and then one that's sort of manageable, or a couple of manageable ones and then one that's really strong. And you might even be contracting every 5 minutes, every 7 minutes. But we're waiting until the contractions are regular and rhythmic, and I describe it as like waves on the beach. So they just keep coming.
Me too.
And they just keep coming and coming and coming. And no matter what you do, you can't turn them off. You can't stop them. And I think that's the big shift between pre-labor and active labor. It's not how regular they are, how strong they are, how often they come, although that can be a part of it. But there'll be a time where it goes from, if I lay down here, it's a little bit stronger. And if I get up, it's a little bit more manageable. Or, there are these little shifts and changes in how they come along, and you feel like you can kind of manipulate them. And then active labor is when all of that goes out the window, and no matter what you do, they're just coming. And I think that can feel really overwhelming. And if you've been at that pre-labor, early labor thing for a day or more, maybe overnight for quite a few hours, and then it hits. There is that really common thing I hear, which is like, oh, I just don't know if I can do this much longer. And that's the thing as well. Women don't very rarely tell me they're not okay, but very often will tell me, I don't know how much more I can do.
Yeah.
And so the big thing we say all the time, I'm sure you do it as well, now that I'm talking to you. It's funny how we don't know this about each other. But
So strange.
I'll be asking women throughout labor, that's okay. Are you okay right now? And if
Exactly.
you're okay right now, that's all you have to be. And when the answer is no, we help, right? We don't
Of
leave you to
course.
suffer. But more often than not, the answer is actually, yes, I'm okay right now. I'm just worried about, and then it's really bringing that mind back to just in this moment. And what's
Yeah.
really cool is that when you're in the throes of labor, in the really like funky part, like, you know, getting towards the end of the contraction part, just before the pushing bit, and women will say, oh, I don't know how much more I can do this. I love to remind them of what they're doing. And 2 days ago, did you think you could do this? And they'll go,
Yeah, that perspective.
yeah. You're like, well, just like
Because
that,
so
we're going to
often
have,
you lose track of what's actually happening,
yeah,
because you're so in the hours and hours of labor. It's like they forget that they're actually they're having a baby.
yeah.
It's a funny one. A big thing that I talk about in labor and in the lead up also is our discomfort with uncertainty. Because just like you said, no one can give a woman an answer who's saying, I don't know how much longer, or they will say, how much longer do I have to do this for? And obviously there isn't an answer. And it's that thing of preparing yourself for the discomfort of the uncertainty, because we are really uncomfortable, generally speaking, with uncertainty. We tend to know everything and research everything, or plan. For birth, you have to plan to be okay, to just lean in and just not know what's happening next. And that's a really ultimate practice in the power of now that Eckhart Tolle talks about, but that ability to be in the moment and accept. And like you say, and what we do in labor is to like, are you okay right now? Let's see how the next half an hour goes.
Yep.
Let's reassess. And just really bringing it back to the moment, which really is a beautiful lesson for life. But practicing that discomfort of the uncertainty. And some people are obviously more uncomfortable with uncertainty than others. And that's a really good thing to be aware of and know about yourself prior, because you can work on it. It's a mindset skill. And it's really helpful to familiarize yourself with and have a plan.
And I 100%. And women will often ask like what kind of birth education they should do, if they should this,
Yeah.
that. There are a lot of different options out there in the world, and I don't really have a strong opinion about any of them. I mean, I don't know, that maybe I would one day if they're anyway. But women will, I do get asked about what about hypnobirthing or calm birth or that sort of like mindful relaxation, meditation, birthing. I think it's great. I think it's a fantastic practice. And some women really are able to take that as a process and use it for their whole labor and birth. A lot of women, there comes a time in their labor where it's so incredibly physical, and that becomes how they manage their labor. And you haven't failed if you haven't breathed through your labor. But either way, it's a good skill set, and you'll use it in the early part of your labor. You will build those synapses and use them through different parts of labor, maybe not in the way you think. And you will 1,000% use those skills in the first few weeks with your baby, because that capacity to be in the uncertainty and the overwhelm, I mean, it doesn't stop when you've got the baby out of you. Yeah, so I think that can be a good thing to have either way. But also, I would say a common time that women are like, oh, this doesn't work anymore, is really when labor fully establishes. And so maybe, it's also a really good idea to have some other tools. Like, I think about it as like a big bag of tricks, see what works for you. I don't know how it's going to unfold, and neither do you. So let's have a few different options to try, and then try again, and then try again. And if nothing else, it wastes some time,
Ways of we get through. Now you're pushing. Yay,
yeah,
look at that.
you did it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think we talked about this one thing actually recently, where I was kind of like, women ask me, can you teach me how to breathe through labor? And that's, of course, a question similar to like, what's birth education? And I'm totally aligned with you there in like, I often say, like, do birth education as a couple if that's what, like if it feels right, and if you learn, because it's good to hear all this stuff from different angle and avenues and different techniques, because whatever I say or whatever you say as a midwife it's not complete. It's one version of it, right? And there's only so much we can cover. So it's like, I'm definitely a big fan of doing whatever birth education feels right, for sure. But I have just noticed that personally, I am just moving away from this, like, this is how you're going to breathe, or this is how you're going to move, because what I'm actually seeing is that when women and couples work on the mindset and the like just leaning into the unknown and the discomfort of the uncertainty and all of those aspects, which is a little bit more like, it takes a bit more, I think, planning and talking about and exploring within oneself, then women do all the things so intuitively. I would say 90% of the time, it's becoming less and less, basically, that where I have to be like, hey, you know, I'm noticing you're holding your breath, or like you're all tense up here. I'm seeing this completely different movement and breath connection that the woman just initiates by herself. And I don't know, I think that's pretty cool in terms of just, maybe we don't have to tell women how to birth. Maybe we need to work on, I know I might be hammered for this, but
No, I'm 100% there. I'm just saying it's absurd that we have to, like, maybe we don't have to teach women how to give birth. Of course we don't have to teach women how to give birth. But sorry.
it's this thing, but I think how freeing that, it's actually within you. But let's talk about all the things that might be blocking you from accessing that intuitive space that is, you're born with this shit. Like, your body is, if there's one thing your body is made for, it is evolution of making babies. End of conversation. And so let's remove the layers that is blocking that space. And so that's changed a lot, where women would be like, so at what appointment do we do the breath work? I'm like, closer to birth.
In labor, you birth, you breathe.
In labor, let's talk about how you can do that for yourself.
It's true, we would not have this many people on the planet if it didn't work. And I know that it's not always perfect. I'm not, like, you know, we're acutely aware of that, so no one's dismissing that. But in general, there's a lot that does work, and a lot that can really get in the way of it, you know?
And if it is, you know, sometimes I do see, you know, women or couples like having the birth education booklet out, and they're like going through the steps of how to, you know, which is also great, because, you know, you might need the steps and you need to be reminded. That's great. But I have just noticed over the last few years, the most recent years, where I'm like, right, we don't, it doesn't have to be a protocol. It doesn't have to be these steps that you have to take and then you can do it right. You can actually remove all of that, which, I don't know, is quite an interesting space that has evolved very organically and intuitively, I think. And I think maybe we don't need to tell anyone how to do it.
It's possible. Two thoughts came up when you said that. One is also because it's as much as I 100% am there with everything you're saying. I also do have women sometimes who are like, oh, you know, they're not maybe feeling like they're going to be super zen and calm and like in their body and like okay with what's happening. But I will also say to them, like, it's actually fine too. Like, don't overthink it. Like, you can't do it wrong. And I'm strong enough for you to hate me through the whole thing. Like, if you and I did that through my first labor, it was F-bombs the whole time. I was like, this is bullshit. I don't want to do this. And actually last year I had three, who were having their first babies in the same week. They just all decided to have their babies a couple of days apart. And every single one of them looked at me during labor and was like, I don't like this. And I was like, yeah.
I hope you didn't have that little smirk on your face.
I honestly think I just kind of, like, in the most loving, caring way, like, it sucks. Like, and you know, I don't know if they felt like I'd lied to them, but at the end they were very happy. I promise. They all had their babies come out the vagina, and they were all like, "Wow, that was so cool!" And I didn't really enjoy it as much, but actually now I feel amazing. And then there's, you know, all the unfolding that happens, but I think the other part of it is, if you don't like it, you're not doing it wrong.
Correct. Yeah.
And there are women who don't like, they're like, this is really intense and hard, but they don't want to be rescued. And I
Yes.
think
Let's
that's
not rescue
really
them.
important to clarify in pregnancy, that someone's like, you know what, I am just going to complain. And some women will tell me that's what they do, because they're like, I have had this many babies and this is what I do and it sucks, but then at the end I'm good, so don't rescue me. And I'm like, great, I'm not going to.
Beautiful.
And I'm sure, actually, I think we've talked about this before. I tell women really clearly, I'm never offering you drugs. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But if you need help, you ask me. Like, I'm here for it. Like, but I'm certainly not going to suggest that you're doing it wrong or that you need help. Because sometimes that suggestion, it plants some seeds. So if it's
of course it
not
does.
broke, don't fix it, is sort of how I look at birth. Hopefully by the time we get to that, there's all those resources around. But just because someone's swearing doesn't mean there's a problem.
No.
And what I'll see very commonly is you'll have, because you don't contract the entire labor, right? So that was
one long contraction.
yeah. It's not like the movies, your waters break, you scream for 10 minutes and the baby comes out.
Oh, yeah.
No. Which is what I thought it was before I had my first baby, because
I can see why.
Yeah. But what happens is you'll have a rest period, it'll build up, you'll have this intensity at the top, and then it'll ease off. And so you'll spend most of the time during your labor not contracting, right? Usually, like if it starts on its own, it's happening the normal way, you'll have at least twice as much time with no pain at all, and like completely gone. It's wild, like completely pain-free. And so I'll see women who will, as the tightening comes, they might be like, oh, this sucks, I don't want to do this. And then as it goes, they're like, okay.
Yeah.
And that's, for whatever reason, that's their coping mechanism. So I think that's very different to when in between they're like, I need help, this isn't okay. And that's a different story. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that as great as it is that there is so much visual content now out there in the world about birth and all that, which with all those beautiful home birth videos, it isn't uncommon to over romanticize birth. Going back to that, like it's okay to actually swear and not necessarily love the process, but it can look a little bit like quite a romantic, beautiful, with a beautiful song in the background and it's all black and white, etc., black and white. And I think it sets the tone that, oh, well, I should be really zen and breathe through this and like make these beautiful movements with my body and, all of that. I think you can probably do that for a part of it. And, in all honesty, some women do, they just look like angelic beings in that process and others don't. But it's not a person has done it more correctly than the other. Yeah. It is okay to be 100% authentically in your who you are in through that process, if it's swearing or if it's singing mantras, each to their own. And it's such an important thing to really honor that individuality and not feel like, oh, well, I'm failing because I'm not doing that breath work that I was taught, or I'm not so calm and relaxed and just going, this is a contraction,
I saw someone on YouTube a few years ago and it was like, oh, this is me in my labor, and she was playing guitar and singing, and then she'd just go quiet for a contraction, then she'd keep singing, and I was like, yeah, that's great. And that's not how I would do it.
Like 88% of the population, maybe.
Yeah, and I guess that maybe this is my kind of final thought is, it's actually not about how you do it. It's about feeling safe that you can do it without having any sense of observation. Women need to feel safe, loved, and unobserved. And it's also that we have that voice in our head that watches what we do, that inner critic that's like, why are you doing it this way? Why are you doing that way? I would say part of being unobserved is allowing that critic to just take a break and not be even observing yourself. Just letting yourself be. And however that manifests itself, that's the right way. The job is to get a baby out. That's it.
With 100%. And that is that beautiful transformative space that is ultimately what's happening, that transformation where you are embracing yourself as you are through the rite of passage of becoming a mother. And that has to look the way it looks for you.